I thought we might first start and talk a little bit about multifocal IOLs, and maybe I'll start with you, Ed. What do you think of what are the limits of current multifocal designs, and do you think we can make them better?
You know, I think we can make them better. I think I'm most familiar with the Restore platform, and we've seen a big change. You know, the original Restore 4.0 was not aspheric, was okay, but not great. And then the 3.0 with aspheric, the patients liked it better. And then the newest Restore coming out is a 2.5, which will have less steps, which I think will reduce glare and halos. And I think will give very good intermediate, and I think will give decent near vision. I predict that lens will be the lens of choice for those in choosing to put a Restore platform in. But ultimately, you know, the multifocal lenses have this limitation of splitting light and decreased contrast, and I think we're never going to push that lens to a great extent over what we have now. I think it has to go to the accommodating IOL. So I think there's tremendous limits on patient acceptance of multifocal IOL technology. But we can make the lens better.
Steve or Andy, is there much corporate small venture capital interest in pursuing new areas with multifocals? Where are we with that?
I'm not aware of any startup organization that's trying to fund a multifocal right now. Doug, you see?
I've seen one in Israel that was a couple of years ago, actually. It didn't get much traction, I think for all the reasons that Ed alluded to. But in recent history, I haven't seen any others in development.
David, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just to back up a step, I think we heard the theme throughout the afternoon that the general ophthalmologist out there, which is the majority of the market, is very risk averse. And with premium IOLs, risk averse just means an unhappy patient for any reason. And so the trouble, I think, with multifocals are they're very unforgiving of two things. They're unforgiving of any residual refractive error. Well, that's not something that's been a problem for us in the past, but we're learning more about how with a diffractive, even 3/4 or a half diopter of cylinder reduces the optical quality quite a bit. And so that gives us no margin for error. And, you know, can you imagine, and you combine that with the fact that, you know, cataract surgeons, we don't, for the most part, do LASIK. We don't have the ability to enhance. And I think if you just think about the surgeons that are doing LASIK, if they didn't have the ability to enhance their patients, you know, how successful can they be when they set a bar of spectacle, you know, independence? So I think that's one big shortcoming. And then the other, of course, is what Ed said, you've got some inherent loss of contrast. And that means now you're very unforgiving of any problem with the cornea optically, with any little minor issue with the macula. And so now you run the risk that maybe the patient actually sees worse because we put a multifocal in than if we had put in a monofocal or a pseudo-accommodating IOL. So I think those are the two things. And one of the things that I think perhaps as ophthalmology and as an industry we should have or could still address is really enabling people, cataract surgeons, to do some type of enhancement afterwards.
Doug, I will say this, you know, that there's obviously patients you'd never put a multifocal lens in, but I can say that some of the happiest patients I have in my practice are patients with a multifocal IOL. You know, and it's our job as surgeons to try to select out those patients who we think are going to be happy. But if you do a good job at that and can select that patient out, they're thrilled. But as David said, you got to be able to nail the residual refractive error. And the average cataract guy who is not used to talking about money, say as a LASIK surgeon is, and dealing with an unhappy patient, he has just a few bad outcomes, and that patient sits in his waiting room and comes back every few weeks, he's done. You know, he doesn't want to go back to that interaction.
And I think the question of the afternoon, when I've seen this chart go up a couple of times, is now we're coming up on the 7th anniversary of the premium channel, where we had the ability to have patients upgrade. So not only did we introduce new technology, we introduced free enterprise and free choice into the marketplace. So now you've got this broad group of surgeons. A subset is willing to deal with the free market. I charged you a price for a service. You're not happy, I'll deal with that. Most of our surgeon friends are not trained for that. They don't like that. And an unhappy patient in their office is a nightmare. So I think you can look at the toric market and say, okay, this is a lens that has a very low enhancement rate. I can do that. But if I'm going to have to engage in an enhancement strategy, which is expensive, and I'm not sure I'm going to get them there, it creates a resistance that we didn't anticipate when we first contemplated this market.
Do you see, I know I do a little bit in my practice, this whole issue of enhancement now sort of encroaching on the toric patients as well? I mean, the toric patients, now, well, you corrected my astigmatism, why can't I see? Well, you're minus 1 1/4. And so I think there's, I think the baby boomers are going to see, they're going to raise the bar for the toric. It's not just correcting the astigmatism. We're going to have to nail everything for them too. And so what do you think the impact on that will be with toric IOLs? Are people going to say, oh my gosh, I can't do that excimer procedure and I can't meet that need, I'm going to back off? Or are we going to see physicians partnering with other physicians to do eximers? What's going to happen in the market?
Well, Doug, I think as we get better at predicting refractive outcomes with the things that Jack talked about, and Jack said a lot of things. Jack speaks faster than I can listen, so. But Jack talked about all those different techniques we have, and I do think, if we look at toric should be a lot higher. I mean, it's amazing to me how low the penetration toric is, and it gets back to having that patient who's minus 1. You nail the astigmatism, but the patient is 20, 30, 20, 40 uncorrected, and they're not happy. So the better results we get, I think we are going to see a greater penetration in toric, because a lot of the surgeons that David were talking about who can't deal with residual refractive error, as we get better and better, they'll jump onto toric.
What is the impact of femtosecond technology going to be on torics? Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's been my experience as being a commercial guy that the doctor prefers his pocketbook to mine. So if we're able to correct astigmatism with one procedure and one treatment with a femtosecond laser, that more than likely will become the state of the art of how you handle postoperative astigmatism. I think if you think about astigmatism in general, there are about 3 ways to fix it now: excimer laser, arcuate incisions with a femto, or a knife. And I think or toric lens. So if you're treating with a monofocal IOL, you clearly aren't going to do an excimer. You're not going to do an arcuate if you have a femto. So I see it having some impact, but I don't think toric lenses are going to go away. I think they're going to be here to stay.
I think sometimes I almost see them synergistic potentially, just because you do a toric lens, and if there's some residual astigmatism, if you've made some femtosecond incisions and you haven't opened them, it may give you a chance to modulate it postoperatively too. So there may be that potential if that proves to be what Eric Donenfeld and others have talked about as being successful.
I think the other synergistic technology is the one that's coming up next, and that's intraoperative aberrometry with torics, because now, there is this conundrum, well, which of the axis, topography, keratometry, refraction do I use? How can I be sure? And, marking it and all the systems. And if you now have a way you can actually measure the refraction with the toric this way and then this way, and you can do that confirmation, I think that's really going to further amp up our use of that technology.
And Doug, I think you're right. I think maybe the low-level toric lenses might go down with femto, but I think we know that arcuate incisions have a limitation, and for high levels of astigmatism, the high-level toric lenses now, the high-power, have done tremendous, and we may see a combination of a relaxed incision and toric in those patients.
You mentioned femtosecond with the IOLs, and in the previous discussion, Roger asked, what's the inflection point? And unfortunately, we don't have the synchrony, the next generation accommodating lens, because to me, that would have been the inflection point. If you look at what really drove phaco, it was the foldable lens. The lens is what the patient is going to live with the rest of their life, and if we have a way to improve on that, we'll go to whatever extent it takes. And I think as we were developing and doing the trials in synchrony, we always knew the hurdle was going to be, could most surgeons make that rhexis? It had to be just the right size and just centered. And I think that if we had that lens or the next generation accommodating lens and that was gaining some traction, it really would have fed in to the femtosecond even more so than the other issues now. People would have said, this is what I need to get that really good outcome.
Good. Let's shift gears a little bit to accommodating IOLs. Ed, what are you putting your money on?
Well, Doug, you had a great overview, and I think if we're depending on the capsular bag and the fibrosis capsular bag, to change the lens, we're going to be unhappy. I don't think we can predict it. I think it's going to have too much variability. So I think ultimately it's going to be a lens that changes shape, and the various technologies out there. And but on the same time, it can't be a really complicated lens to put in. I mean, as David said, you can have this tremendous outcome, but if it's a very, very difficult procedure for a surgeon to get in the eye, I don't think they're going to adopt it.
David, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, Andy reminding us it's been 7 years, and in presbyopia correcting IOLs, we essentially have the same designs as we started with 7 years ago. And our patients would be so upset if they really knew that. They're paying top dollar, they're in the United States, and they expect the top technology.
I kind of like the one we got.
Yeah. With all due respect. To just think of what's available around the world, and I think this is a critical time. I know that ISO standards now are saying that an accommodating IOL has objective evidence of 1 diopter of accommodation, and ANSI is looking at maybe a half. But that's a very difficult bar to raise in a trial, to have to measure objectively the accommodation in every single person when we don't have ways to image the mechanisms that we're doing. And it just points to, I think, a big injustice in a system where traditionally you have efficacy and safety. There's no question that we need to make sure things are safe, but I think when you're talking about lifestyle-enhancing IOLs, the market should determine efficacy. If this was an implantable defibrillator, well, we got to make sure it works, But with a pseudo-accommodating IOL, the worst thing that happens is you wear reading glasses, and it's just not the same thing. And I think that we need to have a different track. And we get hung up on this accommodation, and I think if it goes this way with the way the ISO standards are, we really should look at just calling them pseudo-accommodating and getting away from proving that, because so many of these new approaches and so forth that have a lot of merit, to have to show a mechanism inside the eye, it's just going to be a very high bar.
Steve, what's the venture interest in accommodating lenses, venture capital?
Well, obviously high. I think it's, we view it as the way that the industry is going, obviously. I think to the points of the other panelists, I think we're going to find out from European experience, the experience outside the United States. I think these lenses are really getting tested, and bringing them into the U.S., we're going to have a better idea of their performance in the broader population. So when we're looking, strategies that are being implemented right now are to go outside the U.S., gain experience, and then come back in, which gives you, from an investor's point of view, you're on the market faster. You don't have the regulatory risk. You get the physician interaction is at a high level, and so you get to experience and figure out some of these things ahead of time that are going to drive the U.S. markets.
Would you, or do you think there would be much interest in investing in a lens you see probably making it internationally but not ever making it in the U.S. because of the FDA?
Yeah, well, I think from our point of view, it's certainly a strategy to do that, to make it outside commercial, prove your commercial capability, prove adoption, prove the sectors of the market that it's going to apply to, and then hopefully get it acquired through one of the strategic buyers, and then allow them to formulate and execute a clinical study and regulatory pathway here in the U.S.
Andy, you're the father of all this accommodating stuff. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, getting an FDA approval is better than any patent on planet Earth, and the crystal lens is a good example of that, and it's not necessarily good. I would love to see the free flow of technologies that are safe to our market, and then let patients choose, let doctors choose. Medical devices have a learned intermediary between them and the patient. It's not like drugs. So it's a big argument on my behalf to get the FDA out of the efficacy business when it comes to devices, especially in a lifestyle choice issue. So what happens when you don't have a free flow? Well, you don't have competition. You have prices that get stagnant, and your markets don't evolve. You don't have the competition that you need to see that 15% after 7 years be 20%. I would guess that number was higher if there were 4 accommodating lenses on the market in the U.S. So that's the regulatory barrier. I just think that the good news is that there's still a lot of smart guys that are seeing, and gals that are seeing patients every day, think of new ideas. The bad news is the model is we're going to take them to Europe or somewhere else in the world, take the clinical risk out, and then have a big company take the regulatory issue, take that on coming in. So I think that's the model that you'll see, and it's sad for me to say, because I've been in the business long enough that we used to be Europe. Like Dick Lindstrom said, we used to have 25 IOL companies and lots of competition. But I think the current state is that it's going to be more and more difficult for true innovation to break through in the U.S. market as opposed to overseas. Now, with regard to how this whole thing develops, you know, 5-10 years from now, I think the patients are going to show up at your door 80% diagnosed. They will have taken their iPhone with some app and figured out that they've got a grade 3 cataract. They'll show up and they'll let you know what kind of laser they want to have done. They'll tell you what kind of vision they want to have, and you'll be responding to patients in a whole different way. I think the current state is going to be creatively destructed through technology.
Ed, you mentioned you didn't feel optimistic about the capsule as a site for an accommodating lens. What about the sulcus?
You know, I just think back to the lenses in the sulcus and UGG syndrome and us taking all those out. I get a little worried that it's not going to be the safest place to be. I think it's a potential, but I also am very, very nervous about the long-term stability and safety of a lens contacting the uvea.
So you want a battery in your eye? Is that what you're saying?
Sir,
Where do you think we're going, Doug? I'd like to hear from you. Where do you think?
I'm the moderator here.
Good try. Good try.
I'll answer after David. David, what do you think?
Well, you know, I do think that adjustability, for the reasons we've said, has huge appeal. And the fact that there are a couple different strategies out there now, I still think that is huge, because again, even with an accommodating lens, if you miss and you're -1, the patient's not happy. So I think there's a future there. That just sort of solves a lot of things all at once. I do think, we really want more accommodating, pseudo-accommodating lenses that don't reduce contrast. And again, you can do mini monovision. It's a forgiving platform. And then one of these, the shape-changing ones will come along that can do 6 diopters, and it'll just blow everything else away.
Oh, there it comes right now.
That must be the answer.
Got his theme music with him.
Yeah, that was the right answer.
Well, my thought is that, for the time being, if we can get something in the capsule that gives us maybe a diopter, even 3/4 of a diopter with, as you say, a mini monovision, we'd be a lot further down the road. If we could just get a little bit, and I know people are using the crystal lens that way, whatever the mechanism is there. Ciliary sulcus, long-term biocompatibility in the ciliary sulcus has not been good. On the other hand, these new designs have different haptic design. The new lens has a very different haptic fixation mechanism, and maybe that will be very different. It was shown to be very biocompatible in a primate model. And I think the Alenza and that sort of approach, I like that completely out of the box sort of idea, but there are a lot of hurdles to clear: quality of vision, size of the optic, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, I think it's very intriguing, and I think there's going to be, just like everything, there's going to be a short-term and an intermediate, and then we'll have finally a long-term solution, and that may not even be on the board right now. So any other comments from the panel? If not, thanks very much, everyone.